Hello, everybody, and welcome to our March webinar, Life After Loss, Navigating Your Finances After Losing a Spouse. Today, I am joined by the wonderful Lena Nebel. She is the COO here at BFG Financial Advisors. Lena, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Sarah. It's good to see you, although you definitely look tanner than me right now.
I am in sunny Texas that we've actually seen sun for the first time in a while. We're going to get started with the disclaimer slide that we have to have for legal purposes. And let's get right into it. We're talking about what to do after you've lost a spouse. Where should we start?
Yeah, no, I think this is a good thing to kind of put together an overview of what we're going to be talking about, because I recognize that we're talking about losing a spouse, but I think this webinar could actually be applied to whether you lost a parent, what to do if you're an executor. So the concepts are generally the same, and it can be used for any stage of life. Whether you lose somebody in your 30s or in your 70s, this presentation should, and can be a resource. So for some of you, you may actually be going through this right now. It's beyond an emotional event of losing a spouse. There's the financial aspect of it as well. Some of you listening may be in that what if stage of, well, what if this happens to me? What do I do? And so the biggest thing that I want you guys to pull from this presentation is to be proactive with your estate planning. And what I mean by that is it's important to make sure that you have all of your basic documents done, which is a will, which states who's going to be your executor, what's going to happen to your assets, what do you want to have done with your final remains. There's a financial power of attorney, which states who's going to make financial decisions in the event that you're incapacitated. There's the medical power of attorney, which states who's going to make your medical decisions in the event that you're incapacitated. And then, of course, there's trust planning that can always be done in conjunction with these documents. So I just wanted to make it very clear that during this presentation, we're not going to be covering trust. We're not going to be going through those documents in great detail. So I encourage you to look at some of our other resources, podcast webinars centered around these topics. But that's how I'm going to kind of frame out this presentation, is we're going to kind of assume that some of those documents are already done. And if they're not done, you guys are going to be proactive in getting those documents taken care of.
I think that was a great way to kind of frame this. And I do want to say, while we go through this, if anybody has questions, you'll see a questions tab in the webinar. Feel free to send those questions. If they are relevant to what we're talking about, we will ask them during the presentation, and anything else we will ask at the end. There will be some time for questions. So let's start with what you should be doing first. So we think it's really important. This is important at all times, but especially in a life event where something dramatically changes, like losing a spouse. A lot of the times you will lose an income source, and there will be a lot of financial changes that have to be made. So how do you suggest people really understand their income when this happens?
Yeah, this is, one of the biggest concerns a lot of survivors have is, how am I going to replace that income? How am I going to continue to pay the bills? And people have those concerns, whether their spouse was working or not working, or whether them as a survivor is working or not working. So let's first assume that the person who passed away is working or was working and bringing in a paycheck. That income traditionally needs to be replaced. It was used to funneling into the household expenses, and if we can't replace that income, then we have to adjust expenses. So income is always tied to expenses, because we have to make sure that we're not living beyond our means and now creating additional debt because we don't have those income sources that were lost when somebody passed away. Many times if somebody is working, there's that life insurance benefit through work, and I know we'll talk a little bit more in the conversation about different insurances, but life insurance can absolutely be used to help supplement some of the loss of income. And then also regarding just kind of a paycheck side, if the surviving spouse wasn't working before, they may now need to go back to work. So they may have to kind of make that uncomfortable decision of getting back into the workforce, which is a tough conversation to have. If there are existing assets, if there's a current portfolio, there can be distributions that can come from the portfolio. So it's important to talk with your financial advisor if you have one, talking to your accountant, to talk about, well, we have a Roth and we have an IRA and we have a 403B. How do I take money out of those accounts? Will I get taxed? Will I get penalized? So it's important to understand the various account types and that they all have different taxation that should be factored into the conversation. They also have different investments within those accounts, and some may be liquid and some may be not liquid. So I always tell individuals, and this is going to kind of be a theme throughout this conversation, don't rush in making a decision. Take a step back and really prioritize and assess everything that you have. For those individuals claiming Social Security, that's going to immediately adjust. If you have two individuals who are receiving Social Security and somebody passes away, one of the Social Security checks will stop. It's the lower of the two. So if you have, let's say, myself and my husband, and let's assume that my husband has a higher Social Security payment than I, and we're claiming that benefit, and he passes away, my Social Security income will be replaced by his. But I still had a drop in income because I lost a Social Security side. So it's important to understand what adjustments happen in Social Security. A lot of people think that they'll continue to get two benefits. There's also a survivor benefit for children. If you have dependent children and somebody passes away at any age, there could be some additional benefits through Social Security, depending if they were eligible. So it's always important to have that conversation with the Social Security office, stating that you have dependent children, and then they will tell you how much that they qualify for, which could be additional income to help with if your kids were in private school or if you had daycare, CAMs, etc., just any expenses related to them. For some individuals, when we think of having a loss of Social Security income, life insurance can be used to help to supplement that loss. It can be used to offset that loss. And that's a very popular strategy for financial planners like myself, in that we could apply for a life insurance benefit that when an individual passed away, when that life insurance benefit gets paid out, it can be invested and generating income to replace that Social Security income. The same can be said with pension income as well. So it's important to see if there's some types of strategies and how to leverage some of these other types of investments to generate income for that what if situation that may occur. When you're looking at all of your income sources, it's good to pay attention to your tax return. If you've never looked at your tax return, you just have the accountant do it or you have your spouse take care of it, take a look at it, see where the W-2 income is, your salaries, dividends, is there rental income? Are there other distributions that we have to factor into it? Taking an inventory of all of the investment accounts and determine how much you can distribute is the key. If a spouse passes away who's in their mid-40s, which unfortunately has happened quite a few times in my experience, we need to replace that income for a longer period than if somebody passed away in their 80s. So what you're planning for in those what if scenarios I talk about are going to adjust as you get older as well. How much in life insurance you had when you were in your 30s is going to look a lot different than how much life insurance you're going to have when you're in your 60s, because you may not have a mortgage anymore. The kids are out of the house and they've graduated college. But that also talks about that also factors in your income as well. The income when you're in your 30s is going to be a lot different than when you're in your 60s and 70s. So planning for all of those life events regarding the loss of income is important. And as you go through a financial plan, those are kind of some of those what if scenarios that need to be discussed.
Yeah, you made a lot of really great points. And as someone that isn't going through this, there's so much information here, and I can already feel that this can be something that could be really overwhelming. I do want to point out to everybody, if you go to the handouts tab, we've put together a checklist for anyone who is the executor of the estate of anybody who has passed away. We do have a checklist of everything that needs to be done. So it's going to a lot of what we talk about in this presentation will be covered in that checklist. So if everyone wants to go grab that, it can be really helpful to get some of what we're talking about on paper in front of you. So let's go on to the second one. So once you figured out your income, what if you are in debt?
So this is a big issue and can be a really hot topic for when somebody passes away, because you kind of get this influx of assets due to life insurance proceeds or assets that get sold. And you think, you know what, I'm just going to pay everything off. I want to be debt free. I don't want to have any of those expenses. And you know, one of the most common things that I see is that people just want to pay off the mortgage. Becoming debt free on the house is a priority for a lot of individuals. And I think it's great that you own the house free and clear and you no longer have that expense. But what if the HVAC goes up, or the roof needs to get repaired, or you have an emergency, or you're not working and you need income to be able to pay the bills? Are you going to go tap into that house and take out a home equity line and then therefore go back into debt? This is where I tell people, take a pause, take a step back, and let's reassess all of the debt that you have, whether it's credit cards, car loans, student loans, private loans, mortgages, home equities, 401k loans. There's a lot of different debt that's out there. Some debt is good, some is bad, some is high interest rate, some is 0%. So we want to make sure that we take an inventory of all of your debt in the same way that you take an inventory of all of your income and all of your assets, and then go through to determine what's titled in my name, what's titled jointly, what was titled in my spouse's name, because that may assign a priority. We would take a look at the interest rates associated with all of those as well. And maybe we're going to start paying down more aggressively some of the higher interest rate debt. The key is that I haven't locked up all my liquidity in the house. I have money on the sidelines. I have money growing so that I can leverage that for income down the road. So you have to go through some type of planning and forward thinking, which can be very challenging and emotional when you just lost your spouse, right? You've been planning for a retirement together, a life together, and then now it's just you. So there, like I mentioned, there's an emotional side to everything, and then there's the financial aspect. And so when everything is fresh, it's important to not make these quick decisions, because some of these quick decisions are irrevocable decisions. Depending how you transfer over assets can be an irrevocable decision. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, but paying off the debt, we don't need to pay everything off right away. There's good reason to do that, whether it's to clean up a credit report, if we're transferring titling to somebody else, like a car, we would want to pay that off. So there are some things that, yes, you want to be able to pay off, but initially, I would not recommend, under the majority of situations, to just pay everything off. It's good to have some liquidity and kind of see what happens. And then along those lines, I know, Sarah, you've done quite a few podcasts and webinars on, you know, credit counseling, debt management, student loan conversations. Run a credit report. You'd be surprised how many people think they know how much debt was in their spouse's name until they run a credit report. So there can be a lot of debt that can be uncovered that way. And I think my colleague Eric Brotman was just on a podcast talking about how to uncover some assets and everything and debt when it's not in your name. And one of our relationships, which I'll talk in a little bit later, called True State, they have an amazing toolkit to where they can help to uncover assets and liabilities and things out there that we haven't really thought about as a way to make sure that we can see the big picture. I always tell clients when somebody passes away that typically at the end of the year and the beginning of January, you'll start to get the year-end statements, or there'll be a tax document and it will be of an account that you were not aware of or you forgot about. Everything is usually electronic these days, and so it's hard to track down. But typically at the end of the year, that's when you get a lot of that information, and there's always something that pops up. And so that's why on the tax return as well, it's important to look at some of those areas too.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And it can be stressful. especially understanding what counts as good debt and what counts as bad debt. And that's something you mentioned, Eric Brotman. That's something that in a lot of our webinars in the past, we've talked about good debt versus bad debt. In the examples that you listed out, what would you consider to be a good debt that maybe shouldn't be prioritized for being paid off?
Yeah, great question. So good debt I would consider something that's deductible, so I can use it against on my tax return and claim a little bit of a deduction, and it's low interest. So examples, a mortgage, a home equity loan that I used to enhance my house, those are both deductible debts. Credit card debt can be good debt if it's at 0%, if it's a low interest. If it's a 16% credit card that you can't pay off each month, bad debt. Car loans can be good and bad depending on the interest rate associated to it. So I would say if it's less than 3%, it's probably good debt at this point. Greater than that, we may want to talk about paying that off a little bit more. Mortgages right now are over 6%. Car loans are high. Home equity lines of credit are high. So depending on if you have fixed or variable debt, especially in a rising interest rate environment, you may want to focus on paying off the variable debt versus the fixed debt. A couple years ago, it would have been a different answer because of where we were, in the interest rate environment, in the economy. So like I said, it's not a one size fits all. You have to understand your situation and also the dynamics of everything that's going around you too.
Yeah, it's a great point. Thanks for answering that. Let's move on. You mentioned insurance a little bit before, but let's talk about what should be focused on when it comes to risk and insurance.
So usually what I think people immediately think about when they hear insurance and planning for when somebody passes away, their mind immediately goes to life insurance. And there's a lot of insurances out there that people have to pay attention to when they lose somebody. Or like I said, if they're an executor of the estate and they have to go through the insurances. So all types of insurance need to be reevaluated. There could be additional benefits that have nothing to do with that type of policy, but maybe there was a rider that was added on that could provide an additional resource. There could be a reduction in premium. So I thought what we could do is just kind of spend some time in talking about different types of insurance in no particular order, and some of the things that people can consider as they're going through it. So disability insurance. Traditionally, disability insurance you get through your employer, but there are a lot of individuals who purchase individual disability insurance. So if my spouse passes away and he has a separate disability policy, I'm going to cancel that. There is no reason to keep a disability insurance policy going in his name when he has passed away. So that can be a way to save some of my expenses, which would then say I don't need as much income as I needed before because I no longer have that bill. There could also be a life insurance benefit on the disability policy. So there could be an additional rider that was put on there if he passed away during a certain time period, maybe the first 2 or 3 years of the policy, they're going to send me back my premiums. Or there's just a death benefit rider added on there. So it's important to not just cancel the disability policy, but to instruct the insurance company that this individual passed away. Is there any other residual benefit? You may get back a refund of the premium that you already paid that year because it wasn't a full calendar year. So disability insurance is one. Health insurance is obviously a big one. We need that health insurance to continue. So if Sarah, if you're on your employer's health benefits and your spouse passes away, the only adjustment that you're making to your health insurance is you're just removing a dependent, which could save some dollars. You may decide to change your options. Maybe you don't need the level of coverage that you had because your health is different than your spouse's. Maybe your spouse was going to go through some dental work or was wearing glasses, so you don't really need the dental or the vision coverage. Those are some of the things that you could adjust. But on the other side, if let's say your spouse was working and you were on your spouse's insurance, well, now you're going to have to go through COBRA. And COBRA states that it's the coordination of those benefits, that you get to keep those benefits for 36 months because your spouse had passed away. So it gives you some time to make adjustments if you decide to go back to work and go under your benefits, or maybe you're currently working and you're going to switch those around. That's a life event, so you don't have to wait until open enrollment to do that. Again, the health insurance is a crucial one too. Health savings accounts. Health savings accounts have a beneficiary tied to it. So if you are the owner of the health savings account and your spouse passed away, you want to update the beneficiaries. If your spouse is the one who is the owner of the HSA, you will need to contact them. Hopefully you're the beneficiary and you've gone through a financial plan to identify that you're the beneficiary. But you can decide if you're going to continue that, if that's going to get distributed to you, if you want to contribute to it, if you need to use it. So health savings accounts is another area that we would look at. Long-term care insurance. Nobody would really think about long-term care insurance because you're thinking about, well, if I go into a nursing home or assisted living, I'm still alive. So why would I need to contact the insurance company regarding long-term care? There's a lot of long-term care policies that have death benefits. It could be, like I said, with a disability, it's a return of premium. If somebody passed away within a certain time period, there's a death benefit that could be paid out. It could be a rider attached to it. It could be a life insurance company that has a long-term care benefit on there, where people may just think, well, that's my long-term care policy, but it's an actual life insurance policy. So it's important to look at that. You may also decide to change coverage. Maybe you don't need the level of care that you were thinking you needed because you received some payouts, some additional assets, and so you can self-insure. So this would allow you to possibly change the coverage. What also you could do with long-term care insurance is maybe you don't have long-term care insurance, but because you received some life insurance benefits through the passing of your spouse, maybe now you can use that money to purchase long-term care insurance. So the insurance that you received can actually help you purchase other types of insurance that maybe you were lacking before and didn't necessarily have the resources. Obviously, life insurance is going to be typically the first place that you go. We want to make sure that we put a death claim in for the life insurance company and that you're receiving that payout. But your life insurance that you have on your life, you're going to want to update your beneficiaries. You know, you may want it to revert to a trust. You may want it to revert to a family member, to children. But you definitely want to update the beneficiary. Now, some of you may think, I don't need to update the beneficiary because I have my contingent beneficiaries all in order. And that's absolutely correct. You would not need to update it. But when you pass away, your contingent beneficiaries, they're going to have to provide your death certificate. Then they're going to have to track down your spouse's death certificate. Whoever that primary beneficiary was, they got to go through that process. So make it clean and simple and just update the primary beneficiary so that when you pass away, it's easier on the next in line who's receiving that. Pension plans also have insurance payouts. So if your spouse was receiving a pension, or if they were working and they had a pension with the company, there may be some type of insurance payout associated to that pension. Government employees, there's one associated to your pension. Whether you're alive, whether you're working now or you're retired, there's a payout that's tied to that pension benefit. So it's very common. In general, you would coordinate with your human resource coordinator in looking at your spouse's, all of your spouse's benefits that they had through the employer to make sure that you've accounted for everything. Sometimes there's cancer insurance, and sometimes there's accidental death and dismemberment. So depending on how that individual passed away, there could be an additional payout that happens as well. And you know, and talking about that, you know, one of the things that I didn't mention when we were going through the income sources, Sarah, is, you know, a lot of times with employers, there could be a final bonus that's going to get paid out. There could be vacation payout that could be attributable to their income. So I would encourage you to coordinate with your financial advisor and the human resource coordinator at your spouse's employer to examine all levels of income and all levels of benefits through the company to see if there's any additional income or assets that you can uncover. So part of it is really an investigation, if you will, and how we figure that out is tax returns, leveraging your other advisors like a benefits coordinator, like your insurance agent, typically going through a financial plan. The due diligence and discovery has already happened, but risk management's a big one because there's so many different areas that you can go through.
Something that you said about updating beneficiaries. I know a lot of people that are on this webinar might be going through this currently, but some people might not have already gone through the loss of a spouse, and they are kind of just seeing what to do later. In that case, what would you say about them updating the beneficiaries? I know we talk about doing it a certain number of years. Anything there for someone just kind of proactively they can do?
So any type of major life event, like death, divorce, those are always the big ones, right? Having a child, getting married, that's when you absolutely want to update your beneficiaries, or at least reassess who the beneficiaries are. I like to trust but verify. So you may tell me that your spouse is the beneficiary, and I believe you. I believe that you push the button to say that my spouse is the beneficiary 100%. But you have to make sure that there wasn't a computer glitch, or that the paper that you handed to your coordinator, that they actually processed it. So it's good to actually look at the piece of paper that confirms who the beneficiary is. And the majority of the time, we always uncover assets or insurances that have incorrect beneficiaries, no beneficiaries, outdated beneficiaries. So I would say at least once a year, it's nice just to put your eyes on who's my beneficiary. Do I still like them? Are they still in my life? It's important to make sure that they're the ones that I want to receive it, especially as your kids get older. You know, you start to see the type of person that they're becoming, and maybe you want to do some trust planning for them. You have some concerns about where the money's going. They could get married to somebody that you're not a fan of, and you may not want that new person to have their inheritance commingled together. So there's ways to protect that from happening. But I would say, to answer that, it's good to go through the beneficiary designations during any major life event. But it's nice to put your eyes on it at least once a year to make sure that you have everything covered. That is one of my favorite parts in going through a financial plan, is the discovery, because there's always an aha of, we were able to find, beneficiaries that were missing. Especially if somebody tells me that they went through a divorce or they're remarried, we always want to make sure that the old spouse, former spouse, was not a beneficiary, because when that individual passes away, it's kind of a surprise to the new spouse that they're going to be giving a check to the ex.
And is it also true that whatever beneficiary is stated is what is held, even if it says something different in a will?
So what's going to happen is the assets are going to go by beneficiary designation. So if there is a beneficiary attached to that account, but your will says something different, it doesn't matter. It's going to go by beneficiary. So if on my life insurance policy, I named my parents, but in my will, I have everything going to my spouse, that life insurance is going to my parents. And what individuals, while they have the best of intentions of saying, you know what, I'm going to give my assets to my sister, and my sister's going to be able to take care of everything, and she knows that I want the money to eventually go to my niece or my nephew, or maybe my kids, or this individual, but I'm leaving it up to my sister to make that decision, so she's just going to be the beneficiary of everything. The problem is the sister is responsible for the taxation of everything as well. So life insurance is a tax-free asset when received at death, but retirement accounts are not. Other assets are not. So even though you have the best of intentions of kind of making things simple and thinking it's all going to one person and they're going to handle it, they're also going to be paying taxes. And depending on their tax bracket, it could push them up into a different level. It could exclude them from other benefits. If their kids are older and they're trying to apply for financial aid, having that money in their name may not be a good thing. Beneficiary designations is also important if you have a special needs child. You don't want to name that child outright. You would ideally put it into a special needs trust. And so that's when you pull in the estate attorney to help craft that language, craft that document, and then updating your beneficiary with all of your different accounts as well is important. So when you have on here adjusting estate documents, When you're adjusting the estate documents, you want to make sure that it flows to all of your assets as well. So when an estate attorney gives us the new documents and says, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Smith's new beneficiaries should point here, the contingent beneficiary should go this way, we then put that checklist together for them of we need to update the work retirement plans, the work life insurance, the outside life insurance, kind of have that inventory of this is everything we need to update. And then we're going to make sure that it got updated. So we're going to see that it got updated so that if something should happen, we know everything is put in order, which again, it makes life easier when somebody passes away, because it is not easy when someone passes away. And to deal with the financial aspect of things on top of all the emotions is extremely challenging.
Absolutely. I did just get a message that someone was unable to see the handout. If anyone is having difficulty accessing the handout that we talked about, feel free to send me an email and I will make sure that you get it. And that is a really helpful document, and it is separated into things that you can do on your own, things that you should do with a financial advisor, things you should do with an attorney. So that is a very useful document. If you do not have access to it within the software, send me a message. I will make sure that you get it. So let's move past insurance, which is the most exciting thing we could talk about, and go into something that might be a little more interesting with assets. So what do you have to say here with inventory of assets? What's the most important things that people should know?
Yeah, I think, a lot of it has to do with starting with if somebody kind of went through a financial plan. And let's just assume that somebody went through a financial plan. So we already have that inventory. We already went through that discovery, which makes things so much easier. But if you didn't have that happen, if you didn't have that discovery, if you have things scattered all over the place, then you're really sitting down and putting it all together at that point. You may need to retitle certain assets. So if you have a joint investment account, you may need to retitle it into your name, or you're putting your name with a payable on death designation. If your spouse had a 401k, you may decide you're going to keep it as a 401k, or you're going to roll it into your own IRA, or you're going to make it a beneficiaried IRA. So many of those decisions can impact the income taxation and availability of that asset going forward. So as an example, if you have, let's say, if your spouse had an IRA and your spouse passed away and you said, you know what, I'm going to take advantage of the IRS rules and I'm going to make that IRA mine. Then it transfers over into your IRA. Maybe you already have an IRA opened, you consolidate the two. But let's assume you're 45 years old and you moved that into your IRA. You have now subjected that asset to the IRS rules regarding ability to touch that IRA until you're 59 and a half. So you can't access that money without having a penalty. Versus if you said, I'm going to keep that IRA separate and I'm going to make that a spousal IRA or a beneficiary IRA. Different institutions have different language for it, but what you're basically saying is that this IRA is available before 59 and a half. I'll pay ordinary income taxes on it just as I would in a regular IRA, but I won't have that 10% penalty anymore because I kept that registration a certain way. So don't automatically consolidate assets and retitle them all to your name, because how you do that can really change the liquidity factor of that particular asset. Adjusting the allocations is crucial, and also beneficiaries, which we spend a lot of time talking about, but adjusting the allocations, you're now planning for yourself. And so your goals may be different than your goals together. So maybe we need to take more risk or take less risk. If I need to generate income from the portfolio, then that's going to change the allocation. And of course, in an environment like we're having over this past year and a half, how do I generate the income while we're in a highly volatile interest rate environment? So what other types of assets should I be using? Should I adjust my allocation to incorporate some different types of assets? And so setting new goals, that comes back to I need to go through the financial planning process. I need to figure out, well, what does my life look like now? And that's not going to be something it's not going to happen immediately. It's going to take time and to reassess what you want to do. I've seen often when an individual passes away, they receive life insurance benefits. They want to gift to everybody. They want to take the kids on a big vacation. They want to help the kids with a big wedding or a house purchase. You have to do that in context of what you're going to need as well. Is this decision going to jeopardize your ability to retire, to pay the day-to-day bills? So it's important to set the goals. It's important to kind of, I'd really like to do this for my family. And then let's talk about if we can make that happen with the assets that you have. Determining income needs, again, talking about how much I'm going to need to live off of based upon a loss of income, or if you want to relocate, sell the house, downsize, or move in with the kids, change states, that affects your taxes. So there's a lot of different areas on that as it relates to your income and that's why, we incorporated that extra slide about income planning, because that's a key part of everything. Distribution planning goes back into the income side, but also from a required minimum distribution standpoint. So this, I really think of your retirement accounts and what do I need? There's been a lot of talk this past year about Secure Act 2.0. There was the first Secure Act. When COVID was happening, there was another act that came out, another laws. Beneficiary rules have changed quite a bit over these past few years. So it's important to understand, do you need to take money? Maybe you don't need the income, but you're required to take the income. Making sure that you take that income, making sure that you're taking it over the appropriate time period as well. And that kind of comes back to retitling, how assets should be distributed. Is this going to bump me up in my income tax bracket? For some individuals, when we think about planning now for those what if scenarios, they also think about, well, when my beneficiary inherits this asset, are they going to be in a bigger tax bracket than I am right now? Maybe we start taking distributions sooner rather than later because we're trying to minimize some tax impact for the beneficiaries down the road. So that's why I kind of opened up this presentation, that this can be in all stages of life, and it can be for, we're going through the horrific event of losing my spouse now, or we're kind of thinking ahead of like, one day this is going to happen. Have we taken care of everything? Stock option and pension decisions, those are extremely important decisions that often get overlooked, both while we're alive and when we're the survivor and we have to make those decisions. So as it relates to stock options, you want to make sure that there's nothing that's left on the table with the company, that the spouse was vested in them, that you have access to that account. What I see often is that an individual may receive stock options, they may vest, they could be restricted stock units, and then they flow into a different account. So as an example, you receive stock from your employer. Let's say you're working at Verizon, you get company stock, it vests, and then once that stock vests, it goes directly into the E-Trade account that's holding the stock. But it's all titled in my spouse's name. It's not titled jointly. So when my spouse passes away, that asset now has to go through probate. So going back to kind of the titling, beneficiary designations, it's doing that on every type of asset and thinking ahead of when assets vest. Pension decisions are important because they have that survivor aspect if you elected a survivorship aspect. Pensions are one of those areas. Once you sign those forms and make that decision, it's an irrevocable decision. So if you accidentally elected the single life option instead of the survivorship option, then when you pass away, your beneficiary won't receive that benefit. So going back to the conversation I was talking about regarding life insurance, that strategy is called pension maximization, where you can leverage the life insurance to replace that lost pension. But I think, Sarah, you'll agree, there's a lot of moving parts to this one, and I know we can spend a lot of time going down the rabbit hole on all these different topics and asset types and registrations, but it's a lot. So this, I would say, is just kind of the cursory look of, what are the initial things to think of and what are the initial areas to pay attention to as you start planning out your life.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just so much information here. And as someone who is not going through this, I'm finding it overwhelming. So I can only imagine the other people on here, how stressful this can be. So thank you for trying to lay all of this out and give that information that can be really helpful. So let's go to our final point here, and it's about prioritizing. So in this context, what do you mean when you tell someone that that they should be prioritizing?
So take care of yourself first. You have to put yourself first in this situation. You have to be, as much as you can be, mentally there on making decisions. And a lot of spouses are not prepared for that. So you got to just take a pause, step away, and prioritize what needs to be addressed right now. Can we make the mortgage payment? Is there any dire emergency that we have where we have to come up with funds? You know, the biggest expense that you have immediately is the funeral bill. Okay, let's put that on a credit card. I got 30 days before we need to pay that off. That's 30 days before we, need to make that decision and everything. So prioritizing yourself first, putting your family in there, making sure everybody is available and okay, and coordinating some decisions. Coordinating the conversations with the professionals, informing the financial advisor. And depending on your relationship with your advisor, they can go ahead and contact the CPA, the estate attorney. Let others do some of the legwork for you. Make these phone calls for you. There's a great company that we utilize quite often called TrueState, and they can help with navigating things that we haven't even talked about, Sarah, which is what happens to my Facebook account, my LinkedIn account, Twitter. I think some of us, it's kind of like, ooh, I hope they don't open my phone. I don't know what they're going to see. But you think about just logging onto my computer. If I need a multi-factor authentication, where does it go? It goes to my cell phone. So if everything is paperless and electronic and is passwords, who has all my passwords? Does my spouse know my phone key that can get into everything? TrueState can help with a lot of those areas in navigating, whether it's social media accounts. Do my Southwest rewards get lost? Everything that I've built up, my Marriott rewards? And it's really sad, but the bottom line is, yeah, a lot of them do. So you may want to think about the different rewards that you have. How do I add a beneficiary? How do I add somebody? Is there a legacy account that I can add? And Apple has something like that for them. Turning in car leases. How do we turn in a car lease if it's not in my name? How do I contact a company where I have 3 shares of a stock in, or my spouse did? And so you can hire companies like TrueState to just do all the legwork. They'll take the inventory, they'll do those things, and obviously making sure it's affordable to do that as well. So prioritize yourself first. You have to be available, mentally available to kind of go through some of this stuff, and it doesn't have to get done right away. Leveraging other professionals to help guide you. You don't need to make a rash decision. And then what I tell clients is we're just going to take baby steps. We're going to, bite off what we can chew. Maybe we're just going to start with assessing the insurance coverages, assessing the work benefits. We'll get to beneficiary designations eventually, but we don't need to do it all right now. We'll eventually go through a financial plan with you, kind of reevaluate your goals and everything. Doesn't need to be done right now. So I think when clients hear that, they feel better as they're going through this, because usually there's not anything that has to get done right away. Focus on yourself. Got the funeral to get through. There's a lot of steps, but everything you can do on the front end before we get to this what if event, the better. Go through a financial plan. Make sure your beneficiary designations are done. Update your estate documents. Make sure you create that inventory. If you're the one doing everything, if you're on this webinar and your spouse has no idea, who to contact at your work if something should happen to you, where are the life insurance policies placed, 529 accounts for our kids, am I a successor owner, how do I access those accounts? We need to be able to communicate with each other so the survivor knows, okay, what do I do? Where do I go? Who do I call? That's the biggest item. So that's kind of how I would summarize everything, regarding prioritizing it is for those of you who are thinking of this in a what if situation, there's a lot that can be done on the front end to help the survivor get through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. So this brings us to a Q&A section. So if anybody does have questions, put them in the questions tab, put them in the chat tab, and I will ask them of Lena. So while we're waiting on that, I want to bring you guys to this slide. And Lena, can you talk a little bit about why someone might want to schedule a consultation, what that would look like, and for people in the situation of either they're planning for what might happen or they're already going through it, what is the benefit here?
Sure. I think the benefit, quite honestly, is just to provide some clarity, some organization to your world, maybe a little bit of peace of mind on what you're going through, depending on if you're in the process right now and you just don't know where to start, or you want to begin the process so that you can make things easier. There's resources that we're able to provide you. Maybe you're just looking at it like I'm going to just get my wills done, powers of attorney, medical directives. Do you have an estate attorney that you trust that we can leverage? So traditionally in our consultations, there's a lot of resources that we can provide. There's a lot of guidance that we can go through as we're uncovering additional strategies and everything, and just kind of also identifying if there's any gaps along the way as well. I love how Sarah put on here that it's a free consultation, because that's exactly what it is. It's a consultation. You're just picking our brains on, how we would be able to assist and kind of going through anything. Or maybe it's just a question of, hey, I have this retirement account at work. Would it be okay if I named my beneficiary this person versus this? What would the impact be? So it just could be picking my brain as well.
Great. Yeah. So that is free for anybody who wants to just sit down and have a quick conversation about what an advisor can do for them, what the process might be. So if anybody wants that, it is available for you for being on this webinar. And we do have some questions coming in. So somebody wants to know, is having a beneficiary instead of just designations in a will, is that going to keep anything from going through probate?
Yeah, great question. So anything that goes by beneficiary designation, anything that goes jointly titled, anything that says payable on death will not go through probate. The assets that go through probate is anything that is held in your name individually, that's going to go through probate. And probate is just the process of identifying who's the beneficiary, who should get this. So they got to look at the will. Well, what if there's not a will? Then you have died what's called intestate. Guess who gets to tell you, the beneficiaries how they're going to get the money? The state does. And so every state's different. So if you live in Maryland versus you live in California, it's treated differently. A portion can go to your spouse, a portion may go to your kids, and a portion may go to the state. And I have yet to have a client name the state as their beneficiary. Nobody here wants, the state of Maryland to be one of their beneficiaries. So absolutely have a beneficiary designation or get those wills done. But that's correct that anything that goes by beneficiary designation avoids probate.
Amazing. Somebody did ask, is that if there's going to be a recording of this session to be rewatched? Absolutely. I will make sure that the recording goes to everybody who registered for the event, and I will also include that handout as well as more information about TrueState. Somebody did ask about TrueState, wanting to learn more. So Lena, would you give a little bit of more information on what that tool is and where they can find it? And
Sure.
I will again include it in the email.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you want to include that in the email, that'd be great. But it's basically formed by two women who are attorneys who recognized what was missing in this process when somebody passed away, to be able to leverage them in a more profound way on diagnosing everything going on in that client's world. And we've leveraged them so many times for our clients. And sometimes it's done in connection with their attorney, and then sometimes it's just replaced their existing attorney. But they'll go through and they'll contact the court, they'll get the letters of administration, and they'll do everything soup to nuts, or they'll do it a la carte. So they may say, you know what, I just need you to kind of work on my social media accounts, or I need you to contact all my utility companies, or doing different things. They have free consultations as well, and so that they can kind of address what is going on with you and what would be the best service that you have, that you would need. For some individuals, they start with TrueState on the front end before a death has even happened. We see this a lot with clients that are the executors of their parents' estate. And sometimes mom and dad don't want to talk about everything. Sometimes mom and dad don't know where everything is. So what TrueState can do is that you can leverage them and kind of go through their toolkit process that helps to identify and take an inventory of everything that mom and dad have, help to provide some, you know, basic recommendations and everything. So as an executor, you're already starting that process of, okay, I'm getting my hands around the situation. So one day when mom and dad aren't here, it's not this moment, you know, this fire drill of, well, where's this, where's that? We all have to do a better job of being able to communicate both with our kids and our parents on where everything is. Who do I call? Where's the key to the safe deposit box? What's the password, you know, on your computer? Those are all the things that are important to share up front. Otherwise, it's kind of a mess in getting everything taken care of.
Absolutely. I do want to point out as well that TrueState is a third-party company. They are not actually connected to us. We think that they are doing a great job with what they're doing, so we have brought them in to work with some of our clients, but they're not employed by us or connected to us in any way. We just think that they are a really great tool that people should know about. Another question that we got is it better to have a car titled jointly?
You know, that's a good question. We have traditionally had it to where you want to have your car tied individually to you, mostly for liability reasons and everything. I also recognize sometimes the time and frustration it can take in retitling a car, and states sometimes have different rules as well. But what I will say is when your son or daughter is driving and they're an adult, and let's say they're either through college or on their way out, it's best to retitle that car to them completely, because if they get into an accident, if they cause something to where somebody wants to file claim, they're going after your assets. So whether it's a car, it's a joint bank account, that's something that the estate attorney can spend a lot more time in going through, because like I said, every state's a little different in how they handle it regarding creditor protection and everything else. But I would say traditionally, I would go individual titles.
My parents were very quick to remove me from anything having to do with the cars, from anything in their name. I think it was probably a really good call on their end. So those are the questions that we've gotten. If anybody has any other questions, I want to send them in really fast. Lena, is there anything that you want to add? Anything that you don't think was covered yet that you think is really important?
I appreciate that, Sarah. No, like I said, I think we can really spend a lot of time on this topic because it's such a big topic, and unfortunately, it's probably the best and worst part of my job, because you know you lost one of your friends, you lost your client, but you're able to show the value that you're providing somebody who can't handle the financial stuff. And I can say, we got it. We got this covered. We can take care of everything for you because I know everything we did on the front end. So what I would tell everybody is start doing things on the front end. It makes it so much easier on the other side. And if you didn't do that and you're going through it right now, that will help you in making it better for when you pass away. But have trusted resources, your advisor, your accountant, your estate attorney, your friends and family. They're all there to support you. Just take your time in making those decisions.
Absolutely. Well, if that is all of our questions, then that is the end of our presentation. I'm including on the screen, this is Lena's contact information if anybody has questions about anything that she's talked about, or if you want help setting up that free consultation, you can reach out to Lena, lnebel@bfgfa.com. You can reach out to me by just replying to any of the emails that came through about the webinar. And visit our website, bfgfa.com. It'll get you access to all of our services and everything that we've been doing as a financial advising firm. So thank you guys so much for joining us. For anyone going through this right now, you have our deepest condolences, and we are hopeful that something that we have said today will help make this a little bit easier. I know it is such a difficult situation to be going through. So you guys enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, Sarah.